Good morning, this is Jen, the Liberty Lion, and this morning I want to go over something that Ron Paul has mentioned in a couple of his more recent videos, and that's the Tax Act authorized by Roosevelt. So when they start authorizing these laws, the problem with them is that they are vague, as we've seen in several of my other videos and several articles that have been written about it, that I've mentioned that people can go and read if they choose to. And that the courts then interpret the laws in the way that they feel necessary, which is really legislating from the bench, because they're not using the actual intention of the law. So here we have, this is statute, I think 49, section 1014, chapter 829. I'll post a link to this in the description so you can see it. Okay, so this is on the tax, to provide revenue, equalize taxation, and for other purposes. Now, you have to understand that the federal government, according to the Constitution, was given the authority to tax or to do anything on the federal lands that's in the Constitution. So when it says tax in the Constitution, it's talking about the tax on the people's salaries that are on the federal lands, or incomes or wages or whatever you want to call it. The federal government was also the creator of many instrumentalities, which are called corporations, and those corporations do business for the federal government or with the federal government, and those corporations are taxed also. So when it talks about taxing corporations, it's talking about the instrumentalities that work for the federal government. And anyone who receives a paycheck from the federal government. Direct deposit is a requirement for anyone receiving a paycheck from the federal government, not from your employer of a private corporation off federal lands, okay? So we have taxes. This is under Title I. Now, Title I is just a general title that applies to the people on the federal lands. And I'm going to skip down here and you can read this. I'll put a link in the description. Talks all about taxation. Nowhere in here does it say that they're taxing private income on private individuals off the federal lands. It can make it look like that, but it doesn't. I'm going to skip down here to where it has definitions, and I'm going to go over some of the definitions. Title II, amendments to estate tax. Title II is Congress, and Title II was never passed into positive law. Gift taxes also does not apply to private people. Title IV does not apply to people off federal lands. Failure to file for the people on the federal lands. Okay, Title V, general provisions. This is definitions. So Title V is for the employees of the federal government. Okay, so let's look at this. The term person. And I'd just like to point out to you that many people already know this. Many people are already totally aware of all this that I'm giving you. So this video is really for people who are sort of just learning this stuff, just seeking an interest in it and wanting to know more about it. So many people have already fought with the federal government on the income tax, and lost because this is something that's going to require mass mind change, mass perception change on what the federal government is, what the Constitution is, what it does. I recently posted a video where I showed a section of a video where Napolitano said, when he was talking to Gerald Celente on Gerald's channel, and he said to him, what if there was a state that seceded from the Union and all like-minded people went to that state? And then that state joined a union only for the sole purpose of defending against invasion. And I made the point that that's exactly what the Constitution was intended to do and nothing more. And when a state joined the Union, what it did is it gave up some lands to the federal government for erecting forts. So when Virginia joined the Union, in the congressional papers, it says Virginia, which is an independent state, joined the Union by ceding some lands to the United States, its agency for defense purposes, to erect a new state in Virginia, and that new state was called State of Virginia. The entire state did not become State of Virginia. Only those lands it ceded to the federal government for building forts became State of Virginia. And it's the same with every single state. Now, the state of Virginia, which are the federal lands inside Virginia, is ran for defense purposes under the agency, United States. And the state of Virginia allowed for some instrumentalities in order to get some work done, which are corporations, which are tools of the federal government. And they're doing work with the federal government on the federal lands, for example, for building forts and helping pay the officers on the post. So when it says persons, and it's talking about Title V, it doesn't say Title 26. It's talking about Title V, the employees. It's talking about employees of the federal government who are receiving compensation for services from the federal government, meaning they work for the federal government. And it's talking about the instrumentalities. So the term person means an individual working for the federal government and receiving compensation for services from the federal government. A trust or estate, so it can tax those things. Now, private people do not have to register their trust or their estate or their children with the federal government. It's talking about a partnership or a corporation, person, but all on federal lands, all working for the federal government only. That's what Title V is. People who work for the federal government and receive compensation for services from the federal government. Corporation includes associations, joint stock companies, and insurance companies, all working for the federal government. The term domestic. Now, domestic, we've gone over this. Domestic means within the federal government. When applied to a corporation working with the federal government, or partnership working with the federal government, means created or organized in the United States. The United States is the federal agency working for Americans, private citizens, American citizens, which are not citizens of the United States. Citizens of the United States are domestic for the federal government. Under any law of the United States or any state or territory, because when Virginia ceded lands to the United States to erect a new state called State of Virginia, that's the state that it has control over. The states under its authority, the states it created, the states that the United States federal agency created for defense purposes, or territories, the West, that had not been created into states yet, because independent states can only be created by the people that live in that state, not a federal government. Dependent states are created by the federal government, and those are the forts, the military forts. All the combined military forts in Virginia under the agency's control, called the United States, are called also states, but they're dependent states, and the people on those lands take orders from the president as commander-in-chief. Foreign, when applied to a corporation or partnership, means a corporation or partnership which is not domestic. Okay, so they have corporations created by the federal government, and they have corporations working with the federal government that are foreign, but they're still working with the federal government. So when you register your corporation, you're registering to do business with the federal government. There's nothing in the Constitution that requires anyone to register with the federal government. They say you have to, just like they say you have to pay taxes even though you're not an employee of the federal government. That's how they get you to pay. The shareholder, okay, includes a member in an association, joint stock company, or insurance company. Now, the federal government has insurance. When a federal employee passes away in the line of duty, the family receives insurance, and the federal government receives insurance also. The United States, when used in a geographical sense, okay, now I want to point out to you, it says the United States of America. The United States are the federal lands within America, because when of is used in a geographical sense, it means within. Or you could also say out of, so it's taken out. So the federal lands are sort of apart from, they're taken out or without. Okay, they're within or without, however you want to look at it, but it's not the same. Includes only the states and territories of Alaska and Hawaii and the District of Columbia. Now, when it talks about states, it's talking about the dependent states, because the dependent states are the federal forts inside the independent states, and those are under the control of the United States. This is all in the laws. This is all written out clearly in the laws. The problem is people go and they read the Constitution, or they remember what they were taught about the Constitution. In the education system that's controlled by the instrumentalities, which education, the title for education is not a positive law, and it's part of the federal government that has now been taken under the control of the federal government, but which does not actually belong to the federal government. So if you've been taught what the Constitution means by the federal government, or one of these people that supports big government in their books, one of these books that you've read, then you have a certain understanding of what United States is, and you believe the United States is a country. But it's not. It's an agency erected for defense of a country, and the country is United States of America. And if you read the preamble, it says the United States agency works to do some things for the United States of America. The term secretary, commissioner of internal revenue. The term collector means collector of internal revenue. The term includes and including, when used a definition contained in the act, shall not be deemed to exclude other things otherwise within the meaning of the term defined. Okay, so when they say includes only means that which is listed, that's incorrect, because it says here that it does not only mean that, it means other things also. Okay, so that's the Internal Revenue Act. You can go and read the rest of it if you so choose. And when you look at this, you have to, or when you look at anything written by the federal government, you have to look at it as in the federal government does things for itself, for its employees that work on the federal lands. They tax them. They tax their imposts. So when an officer from a state is elected by the state or appointed by the state to become a representative of the state, and he moves onto the federal lands, his private property is taxed. That's called an impost. When he leaves, it's called an excise. When he's there working, it's called a tax. The people in Congress, if they have trusts and etc., or if they form a corporation under a trust, which they have many of, those are taxed also. So if you create a private trust for your private family, and you put your private money into that trust, you don't have to register it with the United States, because the United States was supposed to be used for defense of the country. And there's a separation, a huge separation between public and private. And if you don't work for the federal government, then you're private. If you go shopping at a mall that's not registered with the United States, you're shopping privately. If you have an account at a bank that's not registered with the federal government, you have private banking. And the federal government cannot just reach in and grab whatever it wants. So hopefully I've been clear on this stuff and that you understand. Now, I've gone over positive laws and non-positive laws many, many times. And Title I is a positive law. Title II is not. Title III is. Title IV is. Title V is. So on and so forth. And if you want to know more about positive laws, look up OLRC. Google that, and then you'll find the laws, the titles, and you'll see clearly which ones are laws and which ones are not. Because the ones that have been made positive law have an asterisk, and the ones that have not do not have an asterisk. So just look down that list and see, what are they doing that you don't have to do? What are they telling you have to do that you don't have to do? If you're not on federal lands, you don't have to do anything the federal government says. And if you are on federal lands and it's not a positive law, you don't have to do it. It's voluntary. But they don't tell you that. They don't want you to know that, because that's how they gain control. Okay, so consider liking, sharing, subscribing, and leaving a comment in the comment section. And I'll see you in the next video.